Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ podcast. On this episode, we are talking IROC. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we spoke IROC. Terry and I got on here and we spoke about our 87 IROC Camaro that we were going to turn into a 6-part build series. Well, the fact of the matter is we built it. It took us 2 weeks. And Ryan Douthit, who's on here, who's our podcast producer and our video producer, he's the guy that filmed it. Terry was one of the guys that built it. I ran out and got sandwiches for everybody, so that was cool. so many cups of coffee, so many sandwiches, so many, and so well, I figured, you know what, let's do a recording on what it actually takes to build a car in 2 weeks. And I will preface this by saying we started with a good car thanks to Terry. So I want to go into that a little bit, and then we'll talk about a little bit about stuff you need to look for, how stuff sometimes goes as planned, but sometimes doesn't. We'll go from there. So guys, how you guys doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing amazing. And I got to actually add something on to you there, Mike. This also had like one of the best crews I've ever worked with.
Absolutely.
Like, everybody, like the entire crew, there was nobody who was slacking the entire 2 weeks, which is almost unheard of in a build series. That just doesn't usually happen. So very impressive team that you put together there, by the way.
So, yeah, it really worked out well. It was a good group.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it, right? So just to give everybody a little bit of backstory. So we shot this entire build series at the Hemmings facility up in Bennington, Vermont, at our Sibley Garage. Formerly museum, really now turning it into a full-fledged garage and studio, which is fantastic. You guys will see that in the upcoming series. But having local knowledge of Bennington and the resources is really one of the best parts about was one of the best parts about being there. I mean, we had a gentleman by the name of Glenn Sauer, another by the name of Junior Devinson, who was one of the main mechanics. Myself, Terry, Douglas Glad, all of us really kind of pitched in to build this thing, and it turned out great. I think one of the main reasons was the car itself. And I want to go back to, if you're ever going to start any type of build, start with the right car. So Terry, talk about why this particular one was the right one.
Well, this was the second car we looked at to buy. So It's been almost a year since we actually acquired the car. And the idea for this project was a follow-up to the Suburban you guys did, and thought, hey, let's do a car this time. So they came to us and said, we want to do a car. We wanted to be 80s, 90s car. And it had already kind of been decided we think it should be a third gen Camaro or Firebird, leaning toward Camaro. So I went out with Roland George, who worked with us at the time, and looking for a car. We found one locally. I mean, really locally, like down the street at a used car dealer. And it was an 87, just regular Z28, 305 4-barrel. Turned out to be a mint. We all got excited. We drove it on a Friday. We thought we'll sleep on it and buy it Monday. We went back Monday and the car was gone. So, and it had sat there at that car lot all summer long. So we missed our shot at that. So then we went out and we thought, well, where are we going to find another mint third gen around here? Roland found that IROC, and we were glad that it was an IROC, because, and I think, Mike, you might have even said, if you're going to build a third gen, it's really got to be an IROC.
Right.
And if you're going to get an IROC, it really ought to be a 350 car. And that's what we found. We drove it. We checked it out. I would say it was in average condition, or at least it seemed that way. We looked underneath it as best we could while it was sitting in the seller's driveway. It looked greasy and so forth, but not rusty.
Right.
Almost to the point where we kind of were like, are we really seeing what we think we're seeing here?
Right.
Car ran and drove well. The price was right-ish. So we bought it. I would say a year ago, the price was okay. I think these cars have gone up. I think we probably got a decent deal now.
Can I interject here, Terry, too? Just for everybody who's watching, if you're not familiar with the Northeast is known for having corroded, rusted
rot. Just rot. Just say it. Like, everything's got holes in it. It's just a rot.
Cars, yeah. So to find a clean one, not just clean on the inside, but clean on the underside, I was like,
Yeah, I mean, and that really is the thing. And yeah, I mean, we bought this car in Schenectady, New York, and if you look on a map, I mean, that's full on Rust Belt.
Mhm.
Yep.
And we brought it back. We drove it around a bit. It seemed like a good car. It'd been messed with a little bit, but compared to a lot of third gens, not that bad.
Yeah.
Had aftermarket exhaust. Somebody had been in the transmission. But generally it ran and drove pretty well. It had what we believe to be a slight lifter tick. Um,
Hmm.
we didn't drive the car a ton, but we did drive it. I had it on the highway a couple times.
Yeah.
Really drove well.
Mhm.
And then we went to take it to our Muscle Palooza event, which is about an hour south of here. And it's a 2-lane highway trip, 55, 60 miles an hour. One of our cohorts, Dan Stoner, was driving it. We were kind of convoying down there, and he flagged us down to stop. And we get out of the car, and he's like, "This thing's making a noise." And I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
it was making a noise, all right."
What did you do, Dan?
And it would be nice to be able to just pin it on Dan, but I don't think he didn't have time to ruin it. If I'm honest, we hadn't gone all that far, so I don't know. I keep wondering, did the guys we bought the car kind of glue it together? But I would love to know what you could put in the crankcase to make that kind of a rod knock go away. I would save that information for the future.
If you're watching on YouTube, post a comment below.
Yeah.
Okay, continue.
What kind of sawdust and gear oil mixture would do that. But we haven't taken the old engine apart yet. I know we talked about doing that when we were here working on the car, and we will do that. That kind of threw a bit of a wrench in our plans, because I know, Mike, part of the idea was baseline this thing. Let's do something with it. Of course, originally we were going to road trip the car, and that would have been a problem.
Yeah. Well, but Terry, we did. I mean, so here's the thing: when Terry talks about a rod knock, when I tell you it sounded like somebody was trying to get out of the engine with a hammer, like that's how bad the rod knock was.
Yeah.
But we said, well, if we're gonna launch the motor, it's already gone, right? It's already boat anchor. Let's just take it out and drive it till it pops.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably put, Ryan, Terry, what do you think? 30 miles on the car?
30 miles or so. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Doing like a preliminary road test just to show the viewers. Yeah. And you guys will see that regarding what this car is. But we drove it for 30 miles with the loudest rod knock in history, and it just kept running and running.
It did get louder, though.
It definitely got louder. And then
like, oh, I think I hear it. And then by the end, it was like, oh, please. Shut
oh yeah, it's loud. When the knock overpowers the exhaust, you know it's bad, right? But then the other part is, once we got it back to the Hemmings thing, we were like, well, screw it. It's already back. Like, let's just do a burnout with it.
Yep.
And we did 2 or 3 burnouts with this thing, and it still lit the tires up, and it did a donut, and it just didn't physically, like, we were all expecting like a rod to shoot through the hood, or the block, but nothing happened.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. Like, it was down on power, though, right? I mean, I think it was it was like, it ran, but
well, I mean, it was not great, but I think the good part was, I mean, Terry and Roland actually found a great car, and I think one of that's the key whenever you're going to do some type of engine, transmission, suspension swap, right? Like, when we put this thing up on the lift, Junior, who's one of the mechanics, he started looking at this thing, and I think everyone was surprised at how well it came apart.
Shocking.
Right, Tara?
Yeah, it was shocking. I put the car in the lift, well, obviously a while before we got involved, and I thought, oh, this again was almost like, am I really seeing what I think I'm seeing? Because I don't really see any problems under here. Later, I had Bob Bennett, who's a local mechanic who's worked with us. He was, I was sort of trying to get him to possibly be on deck for this project. He came over, looked at the car. We walked around underneath it with it on the lift, and he made the same comment. And, he's a seasoned wrench around these parts. And even he felt like, yeah, this thing looks like it will come right apart. And of course it did. Which I'm still a little shocked at, because even on a good car around here, you're still going to fight with the exhaust or getting the bolts out of the lower control arms.
Right.
Everything just came apart on this car. So I don't know what the history of this car is. prior to the people we bought it from, and I don't think they owned it for very long. I feel like the paperwork showed that the car was from around here, but it must have been a special car for most of its life. It must not have been a car that somebody drove all year round. It couldn't have been.
No. Well, I think looking at this, and we had commented on these things through the build process of the 2 weeks that it took us to put this thing together. You know, you look at things like window seals, T-top seals, door seals, things like that. You look at the dash, you look at the condition of the interior. And again, this is a 35-year-old GM product, which means the plastic in most of these of that era are so brittle and they just everything cracks. And I think the consensus was that this was from new. And yes, it had some paint work done, but this was from new, primarily a garage queen, a garaged car, right? I mean, it's been driven, but
it had to have lived a good part of its life well kept, because like you said, and being a T-top car, that just lends to the baking of the interior. And the interiors on these cars were pretty bad. I mean, a lot of plastic. And the only thing that doesn't quite figure is the clear coat damage on the top of the roof and the 1/4 panel.
It's like it almost like it spent its life in the desert first before it was transferred northeast or something, because it clearly has a lot of sun damage on the top, yet the interior was not sun damaged.
No. And in fact, the leather like the leather interior, for one, leather was rare and a rare option. And if you see 35-year-old GM leather now, it's generally split, cracked, the seams are. This leather was in shockingly good shape. No rips, no tears, no cracks, things like that. Ryan, I wanted to ask you a question from a production perspective. Okay. You know, and you've done obviously builds in the past and all this other stuff on camera. What were your expectations going into this, and what were you expecting to see?
Well, I knew it was going to be a Northeast car, or at least we were filming in the Northeast. So I had the expectation that the first 3 days of production, we're going to be trying to get one bolt off from the underside. And welders and cutters were going to be coming out. It was shocking, like Terry said, how quick this car came apart. I mean, really, we ended up like everything just came out, everything went back in. And with a little bit of fussing, which you'll see in the video. There was a couple like, oh no's, how are we going to fix this? But for the most part, it all came together really well. So from like a production standpoint, like in my head, I knew what the schedule was, and I'm like, yeah, that's a really tight schedule to film a build. Like really tight. And I'm a little, the one thing that we're always kind of concerned about is, okay, well, we've shot this video now, and we spent 2 weeks doing this entire build. If anybody ever expects us to do that again, we need a car that is perfectly this clean again, because this is not how this usually works.
No,
we would be in the 11th hour, like trying to get like stuff to work inside of there. I thought Junior was going to throw a chair, but none of that happened. Well,
so, I think
you county choppers, so we'll say that.
No, I think that's the whole thing. I think when we filmed this, one of the things we wanted to do was keep it as honest as possible. We were super fortunate that we started with a really solid, good car that was not trashed, had not been hit. There was some funky stuff, but there always is in a 35-year-old car.
One of the things that really, really helped with the whole smoothness of everything was there were a couple points where we're like, oh no, we need this. And Dad got on a phone, and the part was there like in 5 minutes. And I don't know how he did that. So Glenn, for those who don't know, he's one of the local guys. He's like, what, 4th or 5th generation?
Glenn is like the mayor of Bennington, Vermont. When I tell you, Glenn owns a place called the Village Garage Distillery. And if anybody's out there and they go to Bennington, go there. It's a feast for the eyes. 2, it's a feast for the stomach. Get the pork belly sandwich. It's so damn good. But to Ryan's point, Glenn is the mayor. And man, when we needed something, he would call, and having a local knowledge and just a network. I think, and this goes to any build, having a network of the local businesses and what is possible is pretty impressive. And my God, did this guy Glenn is just, he killed it. He helped us out with so many different things.
A lot of build productions, you end up getting hung up on one thing or another. But the fact is that since it was a local build, since we had the mayor to help us out, and then on top of that, we had Terry's encyclopedic knowledge of Camaros. Like people would just like, "What's this?" And then he'd be like, "Oh, here's the shift ratios." I don't know.
Yeah, Well, yeah.
We're like, how do you know that off the top of your head? So it was, and I think that's again what it comes down to, is that I have so many things when I'm called up to do a build show. I'm like, okay, well, here's everything that's going to go wrong. Not what could go wrong, but this is all this
right. You know, the shit's gonna go south.
Yeah, exactly. And the team that was assembled, and I think it was both experience, also maybe a little bit of fate, that the team came together. Everybody did what they needed to do, and you had. And everybody did something different. Like, Mike, you are so good at getting sandwiches.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate that.
Terry's encyclopedic knowledge, Junior's ability to just put anything together. And then the mayor, also Glenn, is also an expert fabricator. So he was like, you need something there? What can I go make?
Yeah.
Now? And it's like, calm down. We don't need we're not fabricating yet. He's like, okay, I got the parts here. Can we go do this now? Like, where'd you get those parts from? I just had them in my pocket. It's just like, what the heck?
Well, go ahead, Terry.
I was just going to say it having those two guys, because even though Junior didn't get to flex his chops when it came to fabricating, he's also a metal fab guy. So we had both these guys who, I mean, and Mike, you were up in, and I think maybe Ryan, you were too, up in Glenn's shop.
Oh, amazing.
It's not really a professional business. It's just his shop at his house.
It's literally his house. Like half his house is shop and half of it is house.
Yeah. And he's got, a very well outfitted machine shop up there. And and he knows how to use the stuff. And we ran into a couple little problems that, a lot of people would have been like, oh no. And even with a guy like Glenn, if he didn't have a machine shop, he'd probably know the local guy who did. But in this case, it's just like, well, I'll just go run up and do this. I can tell you guys, like, before we did the Camaro, back in April, we had the guys from Roadkill come through.
Yeah.
And they stopped at Hemmings, and we helped them with a car they were taking a road trip in.
Sure.
And Glenn came by, and one of the things on that car that was screwy was a transmission mount, because it was a 71 Pontiac. Somebody before these guys had put a turbo 400 from a full-size Pontiac. So the transmission mount holes didn't line up with the cross member, and Glenn was looking at it. And one of the things Glenn's kind of infamous for is his paper bag sketches. He will literally like draw something out. That's in the Roadkill episode. He runs up to his shop with a new transmission mount, and he's like, look, guys, I this is a quickie. I know time is of the essence. He comes back, he takes the thing and gives it to us. It looks like it was made the way he has altered it. And it fell into place, which, people always say, but I'm telling you, like, we put it up, dropped the stud in the hole in the cross member, and it just tipped in and fell forward, and all the holes lined up perfectly to a dimension that was not stopped. Glenn can do stuff like that, and he makes stuff look good as well as work good. I mean, what did he do? Like that starter, we had a problem with the starter. It turned out we kind of
just milled the bracket.
I'll just take the starter up and put it in my mill and mill part of the housing off. It's funny when we were doing the shifter, and Junior and Glenn are like, and the shifter's nice, but it won't quite fit the hole the way we need it to.
I'll just make another one.
It needs to be 45 degrees, and Glenn's like about to run out the door, like you're saying.
Oh, yeah, he was itching.
Yeah, he already calculated in his head.
He's practically got the mill fired up through his phone. And they're like, wait a minute, let's just look at the instructions first.
Right.
And turned out that time we didn't need any custom machining, but had we needed it,
was there?
Yeah.
So having guys like that on hand and the access to equipment, because too, what happens, I mean, we're in a small town, we don't have access to everything.
Right.
Plus, you're working on something on a weekend or after hours.
Yeah.
You run into one problem, it can halt the whole thing. We never, for those 2 weeks, which, when I say 2 weeks, you guys know it was a Sunday all the way through. We
every single day, working. 10, 12 hours a day, every day.
But there was no point in that whole time where we said, all right, let's break it for today, and then
Right.
tomorrow we'll come back and solve this. No, we
No.
worked till the end of the day, and nothing
Right.
really halted
Right.
us, which, and you guys have already said, I mean, there's a certain amount of just good fortune that came into play here because
Sure.
you can't predict or prepare for everything. But those guys, Glenn and Junior, certainly helped us navigate through some things
Yeah.
that could have thrown us for a loop.
Yeah. So if anybody's tuning in who wants to see like people in a rage and throwing chairs and like
This is not that serious.
burning the place to the ground.
Yeah.
I tried.
Well,
I really tried. I'm like, do you want to burn it? And they're like,
well, I think there's the other portion of this is, again, we're talking about a car that's 35 years old. You know, everybody, you know, myself, Terry, Ryan, you know, Glenn, we're all Gen X guys. What we grew up with these cars. We grew up with these cars at high school. We, you know, Junior, you know, David said it right. He's cut his teeth on these cars. So when you've had a group that knows the ins and outs of these cars, that have driven them from when they were new, even though it's 35 years ago, that helps an enormous amount, because now you have this 35 years of knowledge and stuff that, like, if you were to really throw like a green mechanic on this car, they might not know that this infarctor doesn't plug in here or this piece doesn't go there. Yeah. Everybody knew. And the fact is, if one person didn't, the other person did. Yeah. And I think that's the other part. So if anybody is considering doing any type of swap like this, and you're going to interview a technician.
Oh, maybe explain the swap, because we didn't actually get into it on this stuff.
Sure. Well, what we did with this swap was what we did was we took an 87 IROC and we updated it, right? So what we did was we put a brand new Edelbrock 350 in it, which made a lot more power. It made 380 horsepower, 400 pound, just over 400 pound-feet of torque. We did a TKX 5-speed manual transmission from American Powertrain, a Tremec. We did BMR suspension from Summit Radiator, or from Summit Racing. US Radiator gave us this beautiful stock appearing brass copper radiator that we threw in, along with a.
I just want to say that radiator was beautiful. Like,
oh, it's perfect.
You look at it and you're like, wow, this is a really nicely made radiator.
Yeah.
I just get excited by radiators, apparently.
Well, no, but I mean, but that's the whole thing. So basically, essentially, we took this 87 Camaro and we brought it into the 21st century to make it usable, give it the power that today's highways, you know, count for. And when I say that, people cruise at 80 miles an hour right now, and that's what this car could do now. It now has a really, really nice overdrive. It's more fun with the manual transmission. It's got great suspension under it. It's got some Coney yellows all the way around. But what we did was we took it and we brought it into the 21st century, and we're going to continue to upgrade it because we wanted to make a viable autocross car, track car, and so on and so forth. So this series was really the first part of what we're going to continue to do with this car. Right. But what I wanted to harp on was, if you're going to do a build like this, look in your phone, look in your contacts, and try to find people that know these cars. Try to interview technicians that have worked on these cars, that are familiar with these cars. Like Terry's automotive knowledge is just ridiculous. Like Terry has forgotten more stuff than 90% of the people out there will ever know. Right.
I've clogged my brain with this stuff for years.
It's crazy.
Of good use.
A little aside with Terry. Well, I wasn't going to get into this, but I'm going to get into this.
Uh-oh.
We asked Terry to riff on a few of the parts. We put him in front of the camera, and I've worked with a lot of people on camera, and 90% of the time they're awful. I mean, it's no people, they just lack experience.
Yeah, like, deer in the headlights.
We'll work around this, whatever. Put the camera on, and I know Terry. I didn't know Terry, so I basically I'm like, okay, here's a big unknown. We're going to put Terry on camera. We're going to put the camera right here. Terry, I need you to tell me about these parts in front of you. And he's just like, bam, 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 done. And we're like,
but it's not even that, Ryan. It's the details. It's the details, like just explaining the transmission and then the hydraulic throwout bearing and stuff like there's research involved with this. All the research is just in Harry's dome. So he just pulled it out from, doing this for so many years. Yeah. And it makes knowledge like that brings, I think, what anybody is doing with an old car to that next level, because, and the other part is being able to explain what the parts do in layman's terms. I think that's a massive thing. Sorry, you are
here is that, like, even if you're not into Camaros, third gen Camaros, watching Terry explain why and how everything is done, Yeah, like
Amazing.
it makes sense. I mean, Camaros never really did much for me. When I was in high school, I was more into like Japanese imports,
Mhm.
early Japanese imports. So I could tell you all about those. But you know, American cars, not
Right.
so much in the Pacific Northwest. And but the fact that like the way Terry explains it, you can blush if you like, is I felt like I knew what I needed to know as we
Right.
were going through the segment. And at first I was like, well, maybe it was just because I was there standing next to him while he was explaining, but then we're editing the video. We're several episodes in now in the edit. And I'm like, no, this anybody who, you know, even if you have a passing interest in the third gen Camaro, and honestly, I have to say, I'm sold. It's a cool car.
Yeah.
The Terry makes it easy to understand.
Yeah.
He's great on camera and he explains, but with the amount of detail that even somebody who's like been working on these for years would be like, oh, I didn't know that. There was a few people
Right.
who, like a couple of the technical crew were like, oh, Terry, I didn't know that about this car.
Sure.
So
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I think that's what I think is going to be exciting about this series is that it's not just for people who are like hardcore Camaro guys. It's not, and it's also not for just noobs. You know, it's gonna
Right.
be it's gonna hit a really nice cross section, and also it's fun. So there we go.
Well, go ahead, Terry.
I was just going to say thanks for the praise, and I'm glad that worked out the way it did.
Mhm.
I was glad that I could be useful, and that the stuff that I've been packing in my skull for all these years actually could be used for something. And I guess, you know, it's funny. I've never owned a third gen. I have two first gens, and I've had another one. I've had a second gen. But you know, like you said earlier, Mike, I mean, because of our age bracket, you couldn't avoid these cars. And if
No.
you played with cars, you knew somebody who had one.
Right.
And I have worked on a bunch of them over the years, and that did come into play. You know, Douglas Glad, he is one of our guys. He's the head of editorial here. He had one of these cars.
Oh, yeah.
Back when we both worked at Carcraft magazine, and we both worked on another third gen. It was a Formula Firebird that David Freiberger owned that we had as a project car. So all these experiences, it's paying off.
Right.
We made good use of that information. But
well, I think what was cool is that we had, I think, week one, and again, you got to realize 4 guys were working on this thing nonstop, 10 hours a day. Okay. So let me preface that by saying builds don't happen like this unless you have 4 really experienced guys working on this thing 10 hours a day. Okay. Anybody that says, oh, we're going to build this car in a weekend, probably not going to happen. Right. Because there's stuff that you have to consider. One of the things is week number 1, they did an astonishingly quick job. And what I'm saying by that is all the suspension, motor, and transmission were out and then back in. Okay. That's huge. Now, that doesn't mean it worked. It just meant that the motor and the transmission, the old motor was out, as was the transmission, the suspension, and the new stuff was in, right? But then there's wiring. There's putting a clutch pedal assembly in. There's getting a drive shaft. There's getting an alignment. There's doing this, that, trying to figure, there's vacuum lines. There's stuff. I mean, there's so much in regards to fine-tuning a vehicle to make it actually roadworthy again than just placing the engine and transmission in a car. And that is where that's really your time, right? Because listen, I'm no mechanic, but you give me enough time, I'll get a motor and transmission out of a car. Okay.
Oh yeah. Now, I also want to say for people who are garage mechanics, keep in mind we were filming this, so you know timelines.
And that's the other, yes,
filming as opposed to when you're just sitting there wrenching, because we have to have them stop, redo. We have to talk about parts. We tried to work as much as possible doing 2 things at once, but just for those of you at home who are like, well, I could do that, no problem. Just keep in mind we were filming, so it takes long.
Right. Right. And I think, you know, I think it's a good, most home mechanics, if you're good, you could do this. I wouldn't expect to do it in 2 weeks, but I think you can do it because we didn't, and I say this a lot, but we didn't reinvent the wheel. We made it roll better. Yep. Right. But again, you still have that.
It would probably be a good summer project for somebody who's a good mechanic and has weekends to work on it. You could probably do it in the summer.
You know, I think the hardest thing that we did was probably obviously the trans swap, because we're going from an automatic to a stick.
Yeah.
And I've converted my 69 Camaro from an automatic to a stick, and it was a lot easier than this.
Yeah.
This car, the third gens were not really made to do a bolt-in trans, automatic to manual. And I was glad that Junior took the dive and was the one willing to go under the dash, because he did that whole thing.
Yeah, I have so much footage of his feet dangling in the air.
Oh yeah, out of the T-tops.
Yeah. Now one of the benefits of Junior and his particular wealth of knowledge is, in one of his previous lives, he worked in a salvage yard, and during the years he was working there, he was taking apart a lot of these cars, among other things. So he's very familiar with the fasteners, the way they go together, GM stuff of that period. That really helped. The kit, of course, we use an American Powertrain kit, and the kit was made for that car. It was a new kit, if I'm not mistaken, a relatively new kit. But it was good, like when we put the cross member up, and we're all, I think, waiting for it to be. It went right up.
It worked.
Most of the stuff in that kit worked fine. It was just the pedal box. It was a GM part that we used, and the older Camaros, you just swap the pedals, and there's a plate on the firewall for the clutch linkage. This, not so. But Junior figured out a lot of that. That was probably the trickiest. The other thing that made this kind of non-standard was, we're taking a car that had fuel injection from the factory, electronic fuel injection, and putting a completely different electronic fuel injection system on it. And then what was kind of cool, I thought, one of the cool things is that we retained the fuel system from the IROC and just plumbed it to the Edelbrock fuel injection and made that work, without, having to replumb the whole car, having to rewire the whole car. So that was cool. If it had been a carbureted car and we were putting another carburetor in, or even if we're putting this fuel injection system in a carbureted car, that would have been easier than what we did. But again, we had several people's good knowledge coming together to put this thing together efficiently.
Something that helped with the production, kind of like the unspoken extra cast member, was the actual location we were filming in, because we had multiple lifts. And we had a complete set of tools that were provided by those were sponsor tools for the Sibley.
That was from Summit Racing.
And so basically everything that we needed was there, and that's always really nice. You're not like, I think we're missing a couple things that I'm sure are going to be on a future shopping list. But
well, it's funny you say that, Ryan, because you felt like we were very well outfitted, but I think people like Junior and Glenn probably came into the shop like, where are the rest of the tools? And fortunately, Glenn's tools are nearby, but we've been working out of the shop for a long time, but the shop tools, put quotes on that, were severely lacking. And those of us here who are working on stuff were bringing our own tools in and then having to shuttle stuff back and forth. And that was a drag. Summit set us up with hand tools and a box. That was great. We've had a BenPack lift for like 15 years. And then BenPack just recently stepped up and said, hey, we want you to use our latest iteration of that lift. So we swapped that. That was the 2-post. And then they gave us a 4-post to install. That was great too, because you remember we were able to use the 4-post drive on lift to set the pinion angle and get the alignment close, because the car was on its weight. So the shop has come a long way. We're going to keep going with it. There's plenty more stuff. But Summit and BenPack. Oh, that transmission jack was from BenPack, and that thing was invaluable.
Oh God, that saved us so many times.
We had a transmission jack before, but it was probably the cheapest one you could buy. And it's a delight having this one. It's got the telescoping ram on it. You could foot pedals. It was a dream. So that was really cool. Thanks.
The 4-post BenPack also functions perfectly as a snack table.
As a snack and production table. That was the other part. But you know what?
Wanted higher.
Well, that's just, I think everybody needs an elevating table in their kitchen now. I feel like if I ever redo our kitchen, like I'm going to do that. But one of the interesting parts, and this is, Ryan and I had done a build on my 72 Camaro that we did do in a week. And that was We just swapped out the 350 for a 383, and we swapped in a 200 R4 over the turbo 350, right? So it really, really just was an engine and transmission swap. Now, did we do that in a week? We actually did. But here's the thing that I want to preface about that. Those cars, and you're talking about a 15-year gap, right? Or 13-year gap.
That was your Monte Carlo you're talking about?
Yes, the one that got stolen. Yeah, bastards. If you're out there, rot in hell. But that car was much simpler, right? So to do an engine and transmission swap in a 70s and 60s cars, it really is a lot easier because you're not dealing with electronics. You're not dealing with a vast amount of wiring. And nowadays, stuff really just does bolt right in. For the mid 80s to early 90s, when you're doing a swap like this, you're getting into relatively still early-ish fuel injection, early-ish wiring harnesses, early-ish technology that are in these cars. And so trying to mate brand new technology with this technology that kind of sucked.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it was sketchy at the time.
It was sketchy at the time. And now, and a perfect example is this, is the Edelbrock system, right? Edelbrock, the EFI system that was on the crate engine that they gave us is fantastic. And it comes with this little Bluetooth tablet, very similar to the one you saw that we did in the Road to Improvement Suburban. But you could set everything from the timer to the rev limiter to the, AFR to this, to that. And plus it has a suite of gauges that are built in. So like one of the things that you're going to see is like the tack in the Camaro when we got done didn't work, right? We just didn't have time to hook it up. But we have the Edelbrock system with the tablet, and it literally worked perfectly. And I think that when you have that technology that is so much nicer than what was available, and I'm not saying that the 80 stuff didn't work, but this is just nicer, better, easier, makes a difference.
Well, it was great when we fired the car up for the first time to be able to watch the tablet. Everything is feeding back in real time. So for example, the air fuel ratio, when have you had air fuel ratio at your fingertips?
Right.
When you're starting a car, you just put a motor in. And one of the problems we had seemed like it was related to air fuel, but we could look at the tablet and say, well, no, it's right where it needs to be. That's not the problem. We could watch, the things that the other gauge, I think the temp gauge, the charge gauge, and the oil pressure on the Camaro, we all had all those hooked up and they were working. But again, how nice to look at the tablet. That didn't give us everything because we didn't put inputs for oil pressure and stuff. But it had fuel pressure. That was another great thing because you're starting a car with fuel injection for the first time. Fuel pressure is critical. We're using an old fuel pump. There it is right there. An actual number. And that was really cool. And it helped us sort the teething problems we had, which were admittedly few, but it was a tremendous help. That was cool. It's the first time I've used one of those, and it was really neat.
Doing anything extensive, you're going to have issues. Like you're going to have something. It's just a matter of troubleshooting them. And it gave you all the tools that you needed to troubleshoot when those things inevitably happened.
Well, it was funny, even when we filmed, and you guys will see, like we did burnouts in this thing when we were done with it. But I was like, well, shit, Terry, do we have a rev limiter in this thing? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, let's go into the tablet. And like, we could set the rev limiter in the tablet so we didn't pop this new motor that we had because it was very, a new motor. But it's little things like that when you talk about updating a car. And to Ryan's point, every new car, and I will call this a newer car because we did all this work to it. Every car has a break-in period. And by break-in, I'm not really talking about the parts. I'm talking about figuring out what works, what doesn't work, what you have to continue playing with. So is the alignment spot on, even from the alignment shop? Fine. Are the shocks, like these shocks were adjustable? Is that right? Is the steering input right? Are all the gauges working? Does the AC work? Does the heat work? Does all of this stuff work? And then at what point are you confident to say, well, okay, now I'm going to take this on a 1,000-mile road trip? Getting to that point, and we've all in this circle, we've all built our own cars. That takes time. Sorting a car out, and I say this all the time, minimum of, 500 to 1,000 miles or more before you really know what it's going to do. And that includes, will it sit in traffic in summer in 100 degrees with the AC on and not overheat, right? Do you have vibration coming from the rear end at 55 miles an hour or 70 or 80 miles an hour? Does the clutch pedal engage? What is that vibration, or what is that noise that I'm hearing in the back of my head? Is my brain making that up, or is that real?
Blow up.
Right? So these are all things that when you build something, you're starting from this kind of sheet of paper that, again, melding this old and new technology, it takes time to sort. So anybody out there that thinks it's a quick and dirty process, it's not. We had 4 of the best guys in the world working on this thing, and it still takes time. So
yeah, some stuff is yeah, there's always teething problems. And one of the things I liked working with those guys, it's easy when you're trying to get a car running, you do a motor swap on something, and I think it's unavoidable. We all get that excitement, like, I want to make it run, and then you want to drive it. And you skip over all the things that are unessential or non-essential. And we didn't really do that. Like, most of the gauges work. We will make the tack work. And we just have to wire that to the coil. I'm forgetting some things now. The air conditioning. The air conditioning needs some repair, but we put it on the motor. It's there. Everything's mounted. That's ready to go. There were other things we came across. We did the whole exhaust system before we started the car. We didn't just. No, we did test fire it with open exhaust, and then we put the rest of the system on.
Right.
We put a catalytic converter on it. The guys we were working with nobody had that real tendency to want to just skip over that. We'll get that later.
Yeah, not a lot of shortcuts.
And the day, I think the Monday after we wrapped, I got an email from Junior with a list of things that he was like, these are the things that need attention that I'm aware of. So, we're hot rodders and gearheads, but there's a level of sort of professionalism that a lot of these guys are bringing, where, more like a professional mechanic who's not just going to set something out, give you your car back half done. So I appreciate that. And I think
we're not 20 anymore. I mean,
Ryan, that's the key right there, bud.
Yeah. You're like,
yeah, it'd be great. Heat. That's great, because it's going to be winter. Heat's going to be wonderful. What's also nice? Air conditioning. What's really great? Power windows that go up and down. That is, Ryan is dead on with that. You get to a certain age, and whatever you build, you want your stuff to work. You don't want to be chasing gremlins. You want everything to. If you're going to build a car, make it work right. If you're going to install power windows, make sure they work. Air conditioning, make sure it blows cold. Make sure your defrost works. Make sure your rear window defogger works. Because there will be a time when you are driving these vehicles and you want that stuff.
I'm having flashbacks to some of the vehicles where I like, oh, that's fine enough. When it was in my 30s and whatnot, even where I'm like, I don't really need that. You know what? I fit okay in this race bucket. I'm fine. But 300 miles later, you can't feel your legs. And you're like, but it's a race bucket. I still feel fine. Or the exhaust that like
drones in your ears.
Not okay.
So I want to touch on that, because Terry and I both commented on that. The system that we got from Summit, I'm throwing this out there because both Terry and I were beyond impressed with this thing. This was a catback system with a hooker muffler. Do you remember the model of the muffler, Terry?
Yeah, it's called the Aero Chamber.
Okay. So, and
I'll just throw in here, since we did this, when we did the system, and I'll hand it back to you in a sec. I remember those mufflers from the 90s. I believe that's when Hooker came out with them.
Right.
And they kind of made a big deal out of them. And I haven't heard a lot about them in a while, but back to you.
And we've driven every exhaust system out there. And the biggest issue you get is drone. You get like a tinny sound from a lot. And these are very expensive systems that I'm talking about. This system that we got from Summit, it sounded fantastic. There was no drone, and we're not bullshitting anybody here.
No, seriously, because this is with exhaust systems, you have to trust people who have been in them. You can't test them in advance.
Right.
And so there's no reason for us to BS about this, because it sounded great, but it sounded great, but it wasn't like loud. It wasn't. Yeah.
You know what, Ryan? It was loud. Like when you romped on it, when you got on it, it took on that really hardcore muscle car vibe. Right. It sounded good. It sounded throaty and deep and raspy, and it sounded exactly as you would want a tuned IROC to sound. But when you're sitting in traffic, it was totally fine. When when we rode through the gears, there wasn't any kind of, droning or just weird vibrations. I was beyond it. I was so happy with that, man.
Yeah.
Like I would absolutely put that system on another. I thought it was great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really liked everything you said. I mean, I expected it to be loud when I got it.
Yeah.
And I will say we wound up with that system because a different system that I had ordered was back ordered. So that was what Summit set us up with exhaust. So that's what they had. And I wasn't worried about it, but I thought it might be louder than we wanted. I would say, like you said, Mike, the tone at idle kind of sounds like an IROC, but a little bit louder. When you're driving at low RPM, kind of sounds like an IROC, but a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
The more you get on it, it kind of just continues getting more aggressive than the stock exhaust, but not obnoxious.
Yeah.
And what I really like is when you absolutely mad at it, it doesn't get all choppy and brappy.
No.
It's a real smooth, powerful tone. And I, like you, was really impressed with it. It's not, don't anybody get the idea that this is tame and you're barely going to hear it. It's aggressive, but it's pleasantly aggressive.
Yeah.
Right.
And
outside.
I went and looked at these things later, remembering what I remembered from years ago, and you should look up on at Hooker's site. It's an interesting muffler. It looks like they actually spent some real time developing it when they did.
Yeah.
And now I want to try them on something else. I'm thinking about putting a pair on our Chevelle, because that Chevelle is kind of loud.
Yeah.
Which sounds cool initially, but just like you're talking about, right, after you drive it around for a while, especially because
this might be a good opportunity to, like, what's the worst? I'll start. The worst exhaust you've ever had on a car that you owned. I had a 1998 Acura Integra GSR with RS Sakamoto headers and a Greddy Power Extreme exhaust system. So it was a 1.8 liter naturally aspirated VTEC, and when you would, you'd shift it down to second when you're decelerating. The drone, like, my wife refused to drive in that car. She's like, I am not getting in this car again because of the amount of drone that you had. And it wasn't so bad until I put the headers on. And then that really just kind of kicked it up a notch, a little tinniness. It had a good sound when you were like on throttle, but that back pressure, awful.
Yeah.
How about you?
I mean, I've been in some cars with, and I hate to say this because this is a really expensive system, but a couple of the Corsa systems that I've driven in, way too loud. Way too loud, way too obnoxious.
What you want? You're like,
very
you might want if you have a Corvette.
Well, a very somewhat of a tinny sound. It's just not one of the best systems. You're gonna laugh that I ever had in a car was my S197 Mustang. And I searched high and low. I looked at Bortla and MagnaFlow and this and that and this and that and every YouTube video I could find. I found one video of a guy that's like, you want the best exhaust for this car? He goes, go out and don't change anything except the mufflers. He goes, get a set of GT500 mufflers and put them on your Coyote GT. And I was like, that can't be right. They're like $150 a piece. That's not right. That's too cheap.
I want to spend money here.
I want to spend money. Let me tell you something. I put these two mufflers on my car and transformed it. And it just had they had one less baffle in it. But these were factory engineered pieces for a factory car. So it sounded great. There was no drone. There was no and I was like, this is exactly what I wanted. And this goes back to, so like, who knows? Maybe you can go out there and, like, if you're going to piece something together, try to use a little mix of factory parts, because let me tell you something, they put some R&D into these things and just they work really, really well. Yeah, just a little.
I'm not sure about GM in the 80s, but modern stuff they definitely do.
Yeah.
Terry, how about you? What's your worst exhaust?
Well, I've had a bunch because I had a bunch of cars with actual just junk on them. My first car was a 72 Chevelle, and when I bought it, it had straight pipes and cherry bombs cherry bombs were already blown out. And it just ended in front of the axle, and that was terrible. My parents were like, you got to change that.
Yeah.
And I think I put a set of Hush Thrush mufflers on it, which even then they were like being clearanced because I think they weren't going to make them anymore. The Hush Thrush mufflers were actually good, but I didn't put tailpipes on it, and it still was terrible.
You did something to ruin it.
You were a child. You were a kid.
And then to appease my parents, I actually, a lot of people forget this, but in the 80s, we didn't have all these exhaust companies making kits. At best, they made mufflers, and maybe you could get a kit for a Mustang or a Camaro. But what you had to do is what I had to do was go order like replacement exhaust pipes, combine them with aftermarket mufflers, and then cut the front off and weld them to collectors to put on your headers. So I remember I ordered a dual exhaust set for a big block Chevelle from a place that could still get Mermont branded pipes. And most of these pipes are getting obsolete, and you'd go and it'd be like, I can get the left head pipe, but I can't get the right one, or the tailpipe for the left side's not available. I got all the pipes, and I just got the Mermont big block Chevelle mufflers, and took it to a gas station I worked at the time. One of the mechanics there helped me cut the front of the pipes off and welded the collectors, and it actually sounded great. And some of my friends were good, it's too quiet, but we were teenagers, so anything that wasn't completely obnoxious was too quiet. But it was nice. It was my first little lesson in like you just said, like, maybe some of the stuff that they made from the factory wasn't so bad. Of course, I sold that car, and then I got my 69 Camaro, and it had header mufflers on it. And God. I remember thinking, oh, this is cool. I'm ready to make noise again. And I got tired of that. I mean, when the mufflers are right under your seat, even when you're a teenager, that gets old. And I put the kid I bought that car from he had done the replacement exhaust thing. Those cars had the transverse muffler behind the axle, and he had put a hush thrush made for Camaro or Firebird that was no longer available. And I put all that stuff back on, and then that was great for a while until the muffler disintegrated. It's funny thing, I have a 5-liter Mustang we talked about before, 93 50, and a number of times over the past years when I will have that car out, unfortunately I don't have it out enough, but people hear me driving like, what mufflers do you have on that thing, man? That sounds awesome. I want to know what mufflers are there. Like, they're the Ford mufflers that were on it when it assembly line. And they do sound pretty good. I think we might have the only Fox Mustang that still has its factory catback still on it, but some other things on the car have been changed, but I left the catback because it does sound pretty good. So
listen, if you don't need to change stuff, you don't have to. And I mean, I think that's, the stuff that we did on the IROC was, again, we took a 35-year-old Camaro, we brought it into the 21st century, which was great. The series that we filmed, you're going to see it, 6 episodes on, and this isn't, mind you, this isn't a how-to. We are not going over every nut and bolt. We are not telling you how to do everything.
But if somebody wants to do it, they'll have a much better understanding of the process.
We're giving you a pretty good recipe that if you want to get a Camaro, or you already have a Camaro, and you want to update it, and you want to make it perform very, very well without spending an enormous amount of money, this is a great guideline that you can take. And you'll see how this thing came out. I think we were all very, very happy with it. And again, there are still things that we talk about this in the video, so it's not a surprise. Like stock IROC brakes sucked. The 10.5-inch rotors. And like, did we upgrade the brakes? No, we did what I want to call a factory upgrade, meaning we did put some cross drilled and slotted rotors and stuff like that and made a little nicey nice, but we didn't go bananas because listen, we're going to keep playing with this car. We're going to keep updating this car and keep, until we get it to the point where we're like, okay, this is good. Definitely. So I think we'll obviously keep y'all posted to when this series is coming out. Not going to be too much longer, but I just want to say, Ryan, thank you for doing that for the 2 weeks that we were up there. Terry, obviously invaluable. Me, I'm that guy that writes some stuff and does the sandwiches and keeps everything kind of going on the straight now. But it was good. We all had a really good time. And guys, thank you for coming on the podcast. As always, we will keep you updated. Always a pleasure. With the Camaro.
I had a great time doing that. I really enjoyed working with you guys. Hopefully we'll get to do something like that again.
I think so.
Even if the next one doesn't go as smoothly, hopefully it'll be
Gary is so knowledgeable about another car quite so much.
Maybe Ryan will get his wish and somebody will fast fastball a chair across the Sibley. So
maybe we can stage something for you just to have.
Right.
We'll have the chair throwing
we gotta do
segment.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, everybody, we'll see you next time on the Hot Rod BBQ podcast.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.